All right, what's up? What's good? It's finally time to get back to these year-end videos. I was doing all sorts of like New Year's stuff, and then I was really sick for a while, and then I had a work trip pretty much as soon as I got better. But now all of that is over, and I can finally return to this project. The hope is to finish off all of these before the end of January, at least, when 2025 starts in force. This video is all about the Western TV I watched last year, that is to say, non anime TV. Anime, of course, will get its own videos. Be patient, those will probably come last. That's not like wholly comprehensive, We're not gonna have an entry on, oh, I like rewatched a season of 30 Rock one day because I felt like it. But more things that I watched for the first time or was rewatching in a significant way, or pretty much the criteria is if I felt like making a slide about it, it got a slide. We're gonna start off by talking about the end of Frasier. If you remember at the end of last year's video on this subject, I was talking about starting to watch Frasier, and I finished it up this year. And the whole time, I was kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop because a friend of mine, who's a big fan of Frasier and sitcoms in general, was like, yeah, it's a great show. It's definitely worth watching through. Be warned, at some point, it jumps the shark. And yeah, I would say that in these last seasons, there are a lot of the shark jumping hallmarks, a lot of the long running plot lines are resolved, and now to kind of give those characters something to do, they need to be sort of re agitated. Here, of course, I'm talking mostly about Niles and Daphne getting together. And now they have to have relationship problems because, how do we bring that story back into relevancy? Oh, well, they have a fight about something. And these are some of the most kind of painful and forced plot lines, I think, because it just doesn't really seem befitting of the characters. And it just seems like a shame, too, that for years and years we watched this relationship slowly build from nothing. We felt so happy, that beautiful moment of catharsis when they finally got together. And now it's just kind of being used for fodder for plot lines like anything else. And you have to see them bicker in ways that don't really seem in character and seem to sort of cheapen that whole arc. Meanwhile, the other characters are just going through these Sisyphean repeats of the same old problems for the nth time. Mostly around dating. There's definitely sort of a perpetual hell where none of the other characters can get into long-term stable relationships. Meanwhile, to spice things up, they bring in new characters. They kind of crowd the spotlight and seem somewhat excessive, and generally are just flatter. They haven't had as long to establish themselves. The show wasn't built around them having a role, and so they come across as just sort of more one-dimensional, more one note. The major ones here are Daphne's family, who are all boorish, kind of low class British slobs that are always making Frasier and Niles' life hell. And it's like, all right, that's funny. Conceptually, that's funny. Their performances are funny, but there's not a whole lot to it. And any sort of like arc that these characters are having just is going to come across as very cheap, very unearned. The plot lines get a little more ridiculous, a little more gimmicky. You get the feeling that the core concepts, kind of the core fundamental things that they write the plots about, a dinner party goes awry, a misunderstanding. Niles and Frasier aim to achieve something in some greater social circle and face some stumbling blocks. Those are now sort of insufficient, and you need something that are more elaborate, more kind of ridiculous from the concept alone. At the same time, though, I would agree all of this is true, and you could argue that this constitutes a sharp jumping, but it's still really good. They still know how to play the hits. One of my favorite episodes was this wacky gay misunderstanding episode that guest stars Patrick Stewart, where he's a great patron. Actually, he may be a performer in the Seattle Opera. Frasier is overjoyed to become his friend. Slowly, he realizes that Patrick Stewart's character is actually sexually attracted to Frasier, and Frasier needs to negotiate this without scuttering this very fortunate relationship. Very funny. It's kind of a classic premise again, returning to those sort of core misunderstanding based plots. And Patrick Stewart is just phenomenal in it. He's so funny. Disastrous dating misadventures, and sort of leaning into and embracing the fact that, yes, this is the nth time they've gone through these plot beats. This is the dozenth girl that Frasier has kind of struck out with. And it becomes so exaggerated that it becomes almost this sort of manic despair, which is very funny, albeit a little cruel to the characters. Some of the more gimmicky, high concept episodes really worked for me. One of the final episodes was this traveling back in time, looking at different incidents all surrounding this one earthenware crock pot, going all the way back into the prehistory of the show. Really putting things into perspective with a lot of cool kind of reverse setup jokes, sort of like the Seinfeld backwards episode. Really great stuff. And of course, even though they sort of stray outside of this being the majority or the foundation of the show, they still return to the classics, endless dinner parties, endless mishaps at said dinner parties. And they've become so good at writing that sort of story that some of them are just transcendent, truly transcendent dinner party disasters. Some high watermarks still pop out in this last stage. It really does feel like, for all of the desperation, for all of the kind of running out of ideas, in another sense, they have just become more and more masterful at writing these characters, writing this sort of dialogue, this sort of comedy. And after all of this, the highest watermark, the finale. Ooh, I loved this finale. It's pretty by the book, some sentimentality, some surprises, some big kind of definitive climactic moments, some catharsis, some changes, but underlying all of it, just a real tear-jerking warmth. In the end, it is a very, very kind show where Frasier, despite his foibles, is a good person that wants to do right by his friends. And I think the finale really embraces that and brings it into the spotlight in a way that I found so moving. So I will give these final seasons of Frasier a 9.5. Not quite perfection, definitely some shortcomings, definitely some sort of gimmickiness and stuff, but damn, that's a good sitcom. That is a sitcom that I'll be returning to for my entire life. You really don't get many much better than that. But our main man, the doctor from Seattle, who is actually from Boston, is not gone for long, and in fact returns to Boston. Part of my motivation in watching all of Frasier is because they had announced this reboot sequel series, and I was very curious about it. I wanted to prepare myself for the new Frasier. I wanted to see all that had come before, which I had never done before. But, this was a pretty morbid curiosity, I suppose. I approached this with a lot of hesitation, a lot of skepticism, because when has this sort of thing ever worked? I cannot really think of any examples. I'm sure there are some, but there's so many counter examples, so many bad examples of sitcoms being revived like this. And yeah, it has a lot of the modern trappings of sitcom writing kind of post the US Office, I would say. The current era of sitcom writing, may it last forever. And sometimes this is definitely to its detriment. The influence of the US Office on sitcoms will never, ever, ever be overstated. I could write a whole essay on it. In fact, I would love to at some point. It certainly morphed the landscape in such an interesting way, especially because it wasn't even like they set out to do that. They set out to create something like the British Office, and then it just morphed in this organic way in response to the fans' demands of it, and thus revolutionized the modern sitcom for A lot of bad directions and some good directions. The characters, I think, are designed too efficiently in the new Frasier. There's too many bases covered with each of them. It's like a very strategic, top-down designing of characters where you're trying to kind of like cover all of the demographics that might be watching it. Not just in terms of like racial, gender, age demographics, although that's certainly a factor, but more just kind of like types of comedy demographic. And you just want all of the characters to have fans. You have to make them really likable. Even if they have like detestable qualities, even if they're mocked and berated by the show, you have to make it so that they have like fans, you know? Whereas we'll talk a great example about this, but we'll talk about more in detail. But old sitcoms were perfectly fine having characters that were just functional and did like one thing and never really had arcs and never needed to have fans, didn't need to have be anybody's favorite, that were just sort of conjured up for a very like specific purpose to make the show funnier with no motivations besides that, you know? Actually, Frasier has a good example. The character of like Mad Dog. He has a bit of development. He has some arcs and stuff, sure, but for the most part, he's just there to be funny. And the fact that he doesn't have the depth to support a lively fan base, that he doesn't have the depth to carry an entire episode, let alone like a multi-episode arc or whatever. That's all irrelevant. There's no real compromises made to extend his character in those regards. Instead, it's all just maximized on being funny, right? That to me is something that has like totally disappeared in the modern sitcom landscape. Now, every character has to have at least the potential to carry all sorts of depth, to have an arc, to bring the audience to tears, to sell merch, to be somebody's favorite, to be likable. And so I think something that this lacks, this whole modern sensibility, is the fact that Frasier and Niles are like very redundant characters in Frasier. They're very, very similar. They have very exaggerated differences in the minutia that they fight over, relatively minor things. But for the most part, they're like aligned. They're comrades. It's someone that wholly understands Frasier and vice versa. And it's an amazing dynamic. It's easily in the top 5 sitcom duos ever. It's so funny. It makes both of the characters so much better. And I don't think that could ever happen because they would see Niles as redundant. They would want to make Niles more different. They would want to add more things to his character. In the modern era, they would have made him gay, right? Like, they would have used Niles as a way to have a gay character, right? Like, it would have been stuff like that to expand him and to have him occupy more of the potential viewership and fandom territory. And it's like a lot is impossible if you just focus entirely on that mentality. You miss out on just this kind of chemistry. At the same time, though, putting aside all this modern schlock, which, it's not even that I hate modern sitcoms. Obviously, I watch quite a lot of them. I didn't even mind The Office all that much. It had some really good points. But in general, I was happy to see that Frasier is still very much a classic sitcom at heart. There's still a laugh track. There's no cutaway interviews. I was really worried, really genuinely worried that they would reformat this into the pseudo-documentary style, which of course burst into the mainstream with the US Office and then has been used countless times ever since. It felt like, on paper, a really good fit because Kelsey Grammer is so good at monologuing and the plot lines in Frasier often get so intricate and are so full of different characters' motivations, all being askew. And they already have basically like soliloquies and stuff where Frasier would retreat to the kitchen with one other character and they would just magically be unheard by the rest of the cast. It's very like Shakespearean in that mode. So I was like, oh geez, I could see them doing this. But they didn't. Instead, they have a laugh track. They have multiple cameras. It's very, very classic. And the other thing that I was really, really expecting and kind of dreading was that they would try to make it like very socially relevant, that it would address, the hot topics of today. There would be a trans character. We would have, the good doctor pontificate on all of these issues. And it's not like I'm not some chud or whatever, and I assume that they would have been very progressive. And maybe aspects of that I would have been like, oh, good for them. I'm happy with this stance or whatever. But way more than that, I just would have been like, this isn't funny. I don't need this in my sitcom. You are slowing down the rate of jokes to deliver this relevant social message. And to me, it's sort of like, it's just like lazy writing to be like, oh, well, in this episode, Frasier is going to take a stance on a current hot topic issue. Because you kind of just writes itself at that point, right? Whereas instead, they deal with like more personal morality. They deal with like interpersonal conflict that is unique to the show and thus needs to be built up by the show's writing itself while serving as like a more universal example of some interpersonal dynamic in the human condition, right? Like it's like a free pass to do these hot topic issues. And to me, it just sort of feels like cheap, even if I agree with it. And I didn't expect to disagree with it. Even if I think it has some sort of social value. In Frasier specifically, I want them to try harder than that. The plots instead are mostly just irreverent farce, the classics. Misunderstandings, double bookings, covering up mishaps, cultural disconnects, schemes and counter schemes, and endless failed love stories. What more do you want? They lean into some kind of nostalgia for the iconic aspects of the original. Bringing back characters. Frasier's agent, BB, has an awesome psychotic plot line. Roz comes back. She's great. They go back to Seattle in one episode. They see the old gang. Like, they lean into it without really harping on it, without it feeling too saccharine. Instead, it's just kind of charming and fun, and it leans into your nostalgia just sort of naturally. That it's like, oh yeah, it's nice to see these two on the screen again. Best of all, and this is, I think, what makes Frasier such a great show, is that they build up all of these convoluted, farcical, chaotic plot lines, but it always ends with kind of like the final revelation in the long string of misunderstanding and clearing ups, to be something really warm, something where they realize and consider the care and the love that has been shown between all of them. And I think this show is nailing that. Obviously we're not as attached to the characters. Obviously it feels a little more artificial. But I think they're doing a good job at bringing that heart through and prioritizing that and being sincere and not coding everything in detachment and irony. So yeah, I don't know. I was enjoying it. I would have said here, yeah, it has good potential. I hope it continues to explore and develop and improve and make the characters more interesting, blah, blah, blah. But apparently it got canceled. At least at Peacock Plus, where it was streaming. God, what a world we live in. They decided to pull the plug because all of these streaming companies are, like, totally uninterested in the arts and just have like techified it into just a stream of ones and zeros that represent money. Very disappointing, as always. I want to hope that it can find a home somewhere. I think they should just put it on TV. I was surprised to hear that it wasn't on TV to begin with. I guess they're in talks with CBS to maybe continue its run on the actual network. It's definitely where it would belong, definitely where it would find way more of an audience. But yeah, I would love to say it has potential. Instead, I'll just say it wasn't an embarrassment by any stretch. I genuinely enjoyed it. I wouldn't say it hit any of the peaks of the original, but it did its best. I think it did well. I'll give it an 8. Alright, well, of course, having watched all of Frasier, I had to then go back to the bar in Boston where everything began. So if we really kind of talk about eras of sitcom, I would say that there is definitely like kind of a classic mode that stretches from I Love Lucy and the Honeymooners, things coming from pre-genesis of sitcoms, things coming from radio dramas and vaudeville acts and stuff. That created a formula that persisted. And maybe this is my own lack of nuance because I haven't watched enough of these shows, but I would say that was generally still the dominant mode all the way up until the 80s, and that Cheers was kind of its final hurrah, I think, of that classic sitcom mode. That I would, again, maybe this is limited in scope of me, but from what I've seen, all very characterized by like very, very limited sets. Cheers very famously has like 80 to 90% of all scenes take place in the front room of the bar. Very broad comedy and characters. The writing being very like banter based, all about kind of the back and forth reposts of the characters, and quite simple plots. And again, it's like they're complex and that a lot of stuff happens in them, and there's a lot of elements at play and a lot of misunderstandings and multiple kind of viewpoints on the situation unfolding simultaneously. In a sense, it's very complex, but it's sort of in the same way that like Shakespeare is, where then the actual concept of the plot line is very by the book and simple. Oh, character X wants to hide fact A from character Y, right? Like there's nothing more elaborate than that. At the same time, I think Cheers, you can point to Seinfeld as like the real turning point of these eras, the true sea change into the modern sitcom. But I think Cheers, even earlier, represented this first kind of success. Like before Seinfeld, we had a lot of the elements of Seinfeld here. A major thing that, everyone points to Seinfeld as the show about nothing. But Cheers was the OG show about nothing because it reframed this whole idea of the banal, pointless bar conversation where two drunks are just yammering about nothing and get really heated about it. That was like the comedy of irreverence, the idea of like, what is Cliff even talking about? This whole episode is motivated by like nothing. Same with the neuroticism. Again, it is born naturally from the setting of the show, but I think it is quite revolutionary in terms of the comedy it provides. Just the characters getting so needled about such precise things, and a whole episode spanning conflict kind of blooming from that. And just the hostility, too. And again, maybe this is me just not really understanding the sitcoms that came before it. But the show seems so gleeful in its ongoing hostility between the characters in a way that you really couldn't get away with now. Nowadays, you'd have at least one episode where Norm redeems himself in the eyes of Vera. You'd have at least one episode where Carla, apologizes to Cliff for all the mean things. No. Here they keep up the hostility. It is an endless, surging world of hostility within this bar. It feels sort of like the most modern thing that still feels truly old. Like, the comedy is still so relevant. Like, it's still so much in the mode of modern sitcom writing. Or I guess I should say, like, the post-Seinfeld era of sitcom writing. You could make a lot of parallels between it and It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which, despite the fact that it's been running for like 20 years now, really is like a very cutting edge show, and I think really represents sort of the most modern version of this type of sitcom. Cheers still has a lot of that same element, that same kind of ongoing hostility, the same small neurotic conflicts blowing up in scale beyond all reason. It's got all that, and yet it really does feel old. Watching this, you really are transported into a different era, into decades and decades in the past. So little of this kind of classic formula in terms of just the setup, the character archetypes, the plot lines. None of that stuff really persists anymore. or rather, I think in terms of talking about kind of like the progressive, cutting edge, good sitcoms, it's not there anymore. Nowadays, it kind of feels like shows that operate like this are sort of relics. What's his face, Chuck Lorre, I think still kind of makes sitcoms like this. That broadness, the broadness of the characters and stuff. That's sort of where it persists, and yet this is when it was cutting edge, so it really kind of sets you at a distance from it. The past in this case, it isn't a foreign country. It's not like this is incomprehensible. But it's just far enough. It just feels like a bar a little bit of the ways down the street, where you're always wondering what's going on in there. Yeah, just stuff like, I don't know. An example that comes to mind is chapter, an episode where Sam is dating a young woman, and he's worried that he's not going to be cool in her eyes, that he can't keep up with her hipness and stuff. And he's talking about, you guys ever heard of this dude, John Cougar Mellencamp? Some young upshot rocker. And it's like reading or hearing that, I feel like I'm reading like the Iliad or something, right? Like it is just so far removed from the world I grew up in a way that I think feels quite profound at times. More than any of this sort of analysis, we could go on all day about its position within sitcom history, and that's an interesting topic, but I really just want to praise this show in the end. I cannot overstate how well this show just works. The characters are just so funny, so well defined. They're all likable without being precious, Like I was talking about with modern sitcoms where there's very much a deliberate play to make the characters have fans. They didn't care if you liked Cliff. They didn't care if you found Cliff painful and annoying to sit through. That was the point of him. That's what made him funny. They didn't care if they couldn't sell Cliff's face on a t-shirt, or that they could never make a Cliff spin-off, or that nobody would care if there was a real emotional arc for Cliff. Those things were all secondary, such that when he did have emotional arcs, you did care, because they brought him up so well. There was no preciousness, there was no protection, there was no cloying effort to try to make you like him. Such a great character, such a well realized character, so unique. All of them are like that. All of them. The writing is just top notched. So many jokes, just kind of layered within jokes. Almost every line is funny. One thing they did really, really well that I cannot think of any other sitcom doing to this extent is so many little skits within scenes where the main plot of the episode will kind of fall by the wayside for a bit, and now we've just got a little routine between Norm and Woody, where Norm is trying to scam Woody out of a free drink, And it feels very vaudeville-y. It feels like stand-up, Manzai comedy almost is a good example, where everything else just kind of falls away and you just watch this little slice of comedy that is just so well interjected among everything else. And I think that just kind of results from the cast being so talented, everyone just being so naturally funny, so many ideas just sort of flowing through this process. Everybody just kind of wanted to do a little bit of shtick, too. Plot lines are really inventive and varied. I said they were simple before, and they are, but they managed to come up with so many good, simple ideas, so many concepts that as soon as you hear them, you go, I see how this is gonna go. But just really excellently constructed with this A-B thematic connection, interference, all the stuff I really like to see in sitcoms, all the stuff that feels like it's not just the first draft, but they really bang their head against the wall to try to figure out, how can we make this as funny as possible? How can we make a real great comedic climax at the end of this? The plot progression happens at a really perfect pace, I think, with eras of the cast, eras of characterization, different modes the characters fall into season by season. And yet everything is so episodic. They very rarely get into the weeds of it, where a random episode wouldn't really make sense to you. And then, honestly, it's not like every one of these 273 episodes are absolutely brilliant or, even all that memorable. And honestly, some of them are not even that great. Like, I can remember watching some episodes and just being like, oh, okay. But, like, the hit rate is so high. Like, those are the exceptions, and it almost is, like, 80 to 90% just, like, bangers, where at the end of the episode you go, oh, man, wow, they nailed that. And then, of course, the finale, which instantly rocketed to the top of my list of favorite sitcom finales. I think ever. I think that is just my favorite sitcom finale of all time. Even just thinking about it now, I'm gonna tear up. It is just so beautiful, man. Like, it has all of the, like, Frasier. It's a pretty by the book sitcom ending where you have some surprises and some shocking developments, and it's unclear how it's going to go, and then that gives way to reminiscing and sentimentality and kind of the final lessons of the show. But then in the final moments, I don't want to spoil it, I don't want to tell you exactly what it is, but there's this little moment of epiphany where the whole show feels like it's been recontextualized. And what I was talking about with that idea of, well, the final revelation has to be a warm one. I think it's the best possible example of that. It's so good, dude. This whoops, sorry, Sam. This is an easy 10 here. This is about as good as sitcoms get, man. This is it. Everything about its reputation is deserved. All right. Let's talk about the final 2 episodes of The Curse. We talked about the first 8 in last year's video. And you knew I was a huge fan of it if you watched that video. I think I gave it a 10 as well back then. Basically, it fused everything I loved about the Safdie brothers, except you interjected Nathan Fielder, who is just one of my favorite performers, has done brilliant work in everything he's done. Playing basically himself or that kind of character yet again, which I find just such a compelling, hypnotic, hilarious character. Fusing those 2 elements, just mind-blowingly perfect for me. It hit something that I get from the Safdie brothers very often, that I look for in a lot of other media, which is media that is so stressful, so full of just tension and pain and uncertainty and ambiguity, that I start feeling so anxious that I feel like giddy. And I've tried before to explain exactly how this works for me, or like why it is that I say Uncut Gems is like a comfort movie for me. But it's just the feeling of it being like so engrossing and triggering in a way, though, that I know is safe, that I know is just a TV show and it doesn't actually matter. It's just amazing. It's one of my favorite feelings from watching anything ever. Watching these so many seemingly impossible situations that have no answer, collide, and all these oblique angles, dread around every corner. So many things buried deep across episodes that start re-emerging, like a little plot line that was left unresolved way back in episode 1. Suddenly it's like, oh geez, we never resolved that. You kind of forgot about it. At the same time, there's like so many plot lines that have that energy and then legitimately just fade away, but you can never be too sure. And then by the time we hit the final episodes, so many things had been built up. So many potential directions that could go. There were so many things that I thought had to get paid off. I feel a tickle in my throat. I grabbed some water. Alright. So, if you watched it, though, you know what happened. Grudges, unsustainable, non-solution solutions, open wounds, God, like, so many things were, like, said that couldn't be unsaid. There were just big matzo balls hanging out there. Lurking bombshells, unpaid debt, both literal, karmic, emotional, whatever. an unfinished TV show, a failing marriage, and behind all of it, somehow both explaining everything and yet being totally inexplicable, this genuinely terrifying potential supernatural premise, which of course is in the title, The Curse. It's like this orb of pure cringe and anxiety snowballing down the hill, about to bowl us over. And instead, though, of some chaotic storm of all of these plot lines intersecting and resolving, kind of the finale that I built up in my head, the ninth episode starts to push everything in a more tonally ambiguous direction. Some kind of like semi-positive things started happening. At least superficially, it seemed that way. It seemed at least that they were opening up the potential for some plot lines to resolve happily, which is totally alien to the first 8 episodes. It felt maybe like some final glimmer of hope, or some cruel misdirection, or maybe, this was actually just setting up some other angles that I hadn't anticipated that would be even worse. And then after that, what did the final episode bring? I'm sure, maybe even if you haven't watched it, I think the reputation of this episode has really transcended, has really become a talking point in all sorts of spaces. It truly is one of the finales of all time. What can you say? I personally really, really loved it. I was enthralled. I was so engaged. I was confused. I was baffled. But I was also a little disappointed. I was a little frustrated. There were so many things that I wanted to see. There was so much catharsis that I wanted to have. Which I suppose is like, that's that's on me. Like, that's a lesson I gotta learn. Is that I had started to fall into the same sort of desires as the characters on the show. I wanted kind of the reality TV ending. I wanted to see XYZ things happen, all these conversations come to pass, all of these issues be confronted. But no, it's not really about that. Life is not like TV. You gotta just watch it, man. What a crazy freaking show. So good. I really, really hope Benny and Nathan team up again. Emma Stone was also just 10 out of 10 perfect performance. What a great show. This continues to get a 10. All right, now let's talk about another sitcom finale. We had the final season of Curb Your Enthusiasm this year, after 22 years of putting out excellent television. 24 great years of comedy, even more. Yeah, 2000. That's when it started. Curb comes to a close. And it goes out as, honestly, one of the GOATs of modern sitcoms. And when I talk about modern sitcoms, Curb Your Enthusiasm does not follow any of those rules whatsoever. This is a sitcom that predates and was not at all influenced by the US Office. This is just a consistently excellent display of sitcom prowess. It's topical and provocative. Very, very topical. But it's never pretentious. It never claims to have the enlightened perspective on anything. It never is like, we're going to cut down this issue to size and show you the real take on it or whatever. No. Consistently very offensive and vulgar without ever feeling edgy. This is not South Park. Even though it is topical and vulgar, it is a world away from South Park. And with the most legendary leading man in all of sitcom history, our man Larry David, LD, who transcends morals, needs, even consistency. He is an agent of his own desire, both infinitely powerful, capable of doing anything with unlimited funds, unlimited money, unlimited connections, unlimited time, and yet at the same time he is perpetually powerless. He is always at the mercy of situations that unfold around him. He is always put on the back foot, always fighting as the underdog. He rampages through parties and lunches and chance encounters only for his own self-justification, only for his own self-righteousness, simply to make his points. Nothing will bring him pleasure. Nothing will satiate him. He only wants to be correct. All he has left in life is the feeling that he has the right take on things. He is the one that is acting reasonably in any given situation. And all he seeks to do is prove that to people. To this end, these simple seeming scenarios have evolved to sprawling 40-plus minute episodes with 5 or 6 different colliding plot lines. Truly a masterclass. When I talk about that sort of stuff, that it's like, well, I always love that in a sitcom. You know, having an A and B plot that thematically overlap and then collide with each other and interfere with each other. That sort of stuff that I just am like, that's good sitcom writing. Nobody does it better. So, Seinfeld, I often say that the reason Seinfeld works so well is that they had the characters be callous to one another, which is not just funny, but it allows for all of the different plot lines to kind of like mix and interfere in a way that's like sensible. So in a more classic sitcom where the characters care for one another, character A has a problem. Oh, geez, well, we better help character A, right? Like that becomes a motivating force. In Seinfeld, Jerry has a problem, George has a problem, Elaine has a problem. They don't really care about each other's problems. Like, sometimes they team up, sometimes they do favors for one another. Deep down, they do definitely care about each other. They do want to help each other out of jams. But most of the time, it's perfectly plot sensible for them to gripe to each other about their problems and be met with total callous indifference, right? And I think this is what makes Seinfeld really, really work, is that then all of these problems are happening in parallel, and suddenly they start to interfere, they start to bleed over, and that's where the magic really happens. Whereas Curb kind of takes it a step further, where Larry is just doing so many different things, and he's like unabashedly hypocritical at times. He is always just sort of self-motivated, and he doesn't really care about any given thing that's happening, only kind of what is immediately before him, right? So because of his own indifference to all of the other problems he is creating in his life, you get the same sort of fusing, you get the same sort of everything happening in parallel, and then you get this amazing collision and overlap. But it's all just through Larry's own indifference and callousness to himself. And you know, yeah, like not all 5 or 6 plot lines in every single episode is going to be a banger. Some of them are pretty dumb. Some of them are bizarrely, hilariously self-serving in a way that comes across as just sort of lazy. But, you know, that's fine. The hit rate is very high, and the pinnacles, the funniest of these plot lines, and the moments when everything comes together in that comedy climax, absolute gut busters. I was laughing harder at Curb this year than anything else. I think this is a series that was very, very landmark in building up seasonal storylines. And this is another kind of modern sitcom thing that I think was very much adopted from Curb Your Enthusiasm, where you can look to any given season and be like, oh, this is the season about this main plot line that sort of shows up and interferes with every episode and is sort of the thematic guiding star, and just sort of represents that era of the sitcom. Curb was very, very deliberate about this from the start, and I think there's still some of the best to do it. The final saga did not disappoint at all. I was very proud to say that about 3 episodes in, when all that had happened was that Larry got charged for giving out the water, I was like, oh, okay, I see where this is going. I know what the ending of the show is going to be. And I was so, so happy to see it confirmed. I thought they did that excellently. And man, you know, Jerry Seinfeld, not a good person. For all I know, Larry David, an equally bad person, but Jerry's been a lot more in the news throughout his life for heinous acts, especially in the last few years. He has just sort of come back to remind us all how much truly scum he is. But man, you cannot deny the chemistry that those two have. You cannot deny how funny it is when they start really bantering with each other. And it feels like these final episodes were truly a celebration of this comedic marriage. This combination of Seinfeld and David that birthed the most revolutionary sitcom ever, right? That totally transformed the genre. That gave us probably still the best sitcom ever. Like, has anything really topped Seinfeld? And I feel like taking the final moments of Curb to just kind of celebrate that once again, to put them back in the spotlight together. I was very, very happy with that. This is very, very different than all the other sitcoms finales we've discussed so far in this video. But really, really excellent too. I'm going to give this one a 9.5. I don't think it's like the best the show's ever been. I think the heights of Curb were in other seasons. But I was very, very happy with the finale. Really good stuff. Okay. Let's talk about the second season of Smiling Friends. After 2 years, the hottest show on Adult Swim returns at last. Felt a lot longer than 2 years. Such was the clamorous demand of the hype behind this show, the anticipation. It's not really common for shows to get like that anymore, it feels like, or at least not in the circles I frequent. And the creators, I think, leaned into it in a way that you don't see that often anymore. Where it's like, nowadays, I think just with the nature of like streaming services and stuff, there's like a real disconnect between the creators and the audience, which feels ironic. It feels like it should be the other way around, that the streaming era has brought everybody kind of closer together. But now it's just so productized. Everything is like dumped a season at a time with such little fanfare. It's just there on the page one day to watch at your leisure. It's not like an event anymore. And, because of that, it's so kind of like prescribed and so by the book that, oh, okay, you just go on Netflix at this day and it'll be uploaded. There's not room for this kind of fun that used to be a lot more common in the lead up to a really anticipated premiere like this. And it used to be a common thing on Adult Swim that the creators of these successful shows like Aqua Teen Hunger Force or Tim and Eric or whatever, they'd freaking troll you. They do some good old freaking trolling. With fake outs, puppet editions, bizarre claims of, yeah, we're just going to show it now, and then showing it in a tiny mute 1 by 1 inch box in the bottom corner, releasing stuff on April Fool's Day. Like, some of them, these are fairly recent, with like Rick and Morty and stuff was doing some of these little trolls. But I feel like Smiling Friends leaned into it in a way that I to an extent that I hadn't seen in a long time, which I really, really enjoyed. It really feels like it harkens back to a more kind of helpless and desperate era of TV watching. That, like I said, it's not so productized, it's not so simple that it just shows up on Netflix one day. Instead, it's like, I am going to tune in at the specific time on the specific channel because I have been told that the new episode will premiere, and I'm just like crossing my fingers and hoping that wasn't like a lie. There's sort of like a sort of faith you have to have that I think is very intimate between the creator. And let's look back at something like Haruhi, right? When Endless 8 was airing, that was like being at the mercy of like a cruel, uncaring god. But there was like a real intimacy that you felt with all of the other fans and with the creators too. There was like this very personal, strange connection that was being forged. Nowadays, it's like, oh, did you hear the latest episode of Haruhi is out? Yeah, okay, I guess I'll watch that at some point. Don't bother, it's another Endless 8 one. Oh, okay. There's no like mania, there's no fervor, there's no sense of desperation to watch in the mere hope that it could be what you want. It's insane, man. Despite this trolling, and honestly, having said all that, I think largely because of this trolling, I feel a lot of intimacy with this show. And also, it's because of the source material. It's because of how this show was created, where it sprung up from. Um, to me, it's more of a proximity to intimacy, I guess, because I wasn't personally a huge Oni Plays watcher. Like, I never would just watch their videos or whatever. I was like aware of them. But I've been exposed. My boyfriend loves Oni Plays. I have some other friends that love Oni Plays. So I would watch a lot of clips and stuff that they'd send me. I knew who these people were. I had a sense of the comedy and stuff. And I would say that, like, if I think about my own internet humor, what I find funny on the internet, this is definitely the closest that something on TV has ever come to that, right? Which is pretty crazy. So what about the show itself? I think this is already overall even stronger than the first season. I did love the first season already, but this I think is even better. The plot lines I think are funnier. Feel a little more ambitious, a little more interesting. The concepts are a little more elaborate and feel a little less like first idea-y. I'd say my biggest complaint about season 1 of Smiling Friends is that the plotline concepts felt very much like, oh, it would be funny if, like, there's this TV show called Mr. Frog, and it's just unimaginably basic, but then, like, Mr. Frog gets canceled. Oh, yeah, that sounds funny. All right, let's run with it. And then it's like, kind of the whole thing didn't really advance past that in terms of the fundamental idea. Here it feels a lot more like they really thought for a while about, like, not just what is a plot that sounds funny, but, like, what is something that's going to, like, consistently give us a bunch of funny jokes, if that makes sense. It's sort of like, uh, where was I going with this? I was gonna start talking about The Simpsons, but I can't remember why. I guess just, like, yeah, if you look to, like, classic sitcoms, those episodes had plot lines that were, like, very meticulously groomed to be funny. They had all sorts of, like, little kinks and twists and setups worked into them from the foundational premise, from the actual beats of the story to be funny. It wasn't just, like, one idea. And I felt like they were moving in that direction a little bit more. The animation, I think, hit even more heights of variety and creativity. In doing so, it basically laps every other, like, Western animation show. Like, already they were doing stuff that was way more creative than, like, Rick and Morty or whatever, and now they are going even further beyond. The much praised Wimbly low poly insertion that birthed, like, a million memes and fan edits and stuff. I was really impressed with that. I thought that was just really, really funny and really well executed and very creative. And again, like, a premise that's a little more elaborate. Like, wouldn't it be funny if a character that used to star in, like, PS1 era video games is now just, like, a washout, and he's a deadbeat, and he starts bumming around the Smiling Friends? That's funny. And then they go to, like, all of these lengths to, like, they think about, oh, okay, well, what would they do? They would have to get his career back. Okay, well, then let's come up with a character that's the guy that's, like, holding the rights and preventing this and blah 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 blah. You know what I'm saying? Like, they actually make, like, a plot out of it. So yeah, that really impressed me. And then Spamtopia, that whole thing just, like, really, really delighted me. It was so abrasive. It was so, like, chaotic and scary and just, like, hellish and migraine inducing. I was so impressed that they went so far with that style, and they did it for such a substantial part of the episode. Really, really great stuff. The guest spots, many of the gags, many of the callbacks felt like really laser targeted at me. That again reminds me so much of the sort of internet humor I like that just very oblique sort of callback, that sort of self-memeing, or just, like, picking at a very particular spot on your brain that you didn't really think anybody else would know about, let alone put into a TV show. Really felt like they just had me in their sights. They knew what I would find funny, and they nailed it. I found it funny. And, the kind of bantery, loose dialogue, which of course stems directly from their roots as Let's Players and podcasters, along with being animators. That stuff is really still funny to me. And now, like, everybody's doing this already. Kind of everybody was doing this. You could say it dates back to, like, Rick and Morty and stuff. There's that. Wouldn't it be funny if a cartoon stumbled over its lines and burped, but we left it in even though it was a cartoon? You remember that? I don't know. Maybe that isn't as widely known as I think, but like, there's like a little animation that like parodies this because it's just everywhere. This sort of comedy writing for adult animated cartoons, where they just kind of like banter and stumble over themselves and stuff. And I think this is the only show that's like still funny when it does that. All right, really good stuff. We will give this a 9 out of 10. I'm very excited for more. I think they're killing it. All right, let's talk about the Red Green Show. After I watched all of these American sitcoms, I wanted another show to just kind of have on the background when I did work. So I decided to return to something truly mega Canadian, like one of the most Canadian shows I can think of, a staple of my childhood. Was watching random episodes on TV, and so I thought I would also just kind of seek out episodes at random. This is maybe like the most Canadian show of all time. At least when you think of the likable aspects of the image of Canada, how founded in reality that is a matter of ongoing debate. But if you kind of put together your most positive stereotype of a Canadian, you would get Mr. Red Green. The Hitcore Lakeshore setting, you know, the big cast that reflects every walk of life out there in the woods. Can you imagine, man, how much shit has changed since the show aired? The idea that there's like this semi-impoverished, low-class, kind of run-down community out on the edge of Possum Lake, which by its name you imagine is smelly. Can you imagine realistically what Possum Lake is like now? It's probably a fucking Doug Ford cottage up there. Gentrified out the ass. Ruined. We have not done well to preserve this way of life, that's for sure. I think in watching the show and kind of contrasting the hick setting of it with like an equivalent American redneck type thing, I think you can contrast two similar on the surface but very, very different philosophies that both sort of revolve around self-sufficiency, but in its sort of attitude and tonality and characteristics are very, very different. So Red and Friends are doing all of these crazy projects. You know, almost every episode is about, well, we saw the government was building a hydroelectric dam out there, and well, we figured ain't nothing hard about making a dam. I can't do this voice. And so they try to make their own dam or whatever, right? They're always doing these kind of crazy harebrained schemes that are mostly around like making money or doing something that they normally had to pay for free, getting out of having to pay taxes for XYZ because they can do it themselves. And they do it, yeah, because it's fun and because they'll make some cash and because they're too lazy to do it the proper way. It's not because they hate the government. It's not because they're trying to show them. It's not because they think they're going to be institutionalized and controlled and deprived of their freedom if they're not capable of doing this. They just kind of do it for the hell of it. Many schemes really, really remind me of my dad. You know, my dad is a character quite like this in a lot of ways. And some of the schemes are actually, like, identical. There's one where they try to figure out a way to market, like, luxury firewood to city slickers. Basically, you know, how can we get them to pay more? What kind of things can we do to spice it up and appeal to their yuppie sensibilities? My dad, all through my high school, that is, was always scheming about this exact same thing. So we had all this frickin' firewood out at the farm, and he wanted to figure out a way to get more money out of it. The tone of the humor, I think, is very distinctly Canadian. I've talked about this before with various shows. Trailer Park Boys is a great example too. I think this is really one of the best examples. It's always just a good natured ribbing of big personalities, but they always get a shot back in on the straight man. And I think that's something very, very key. There's always kind of a nebulous hierarchy where, yeah, Harold is a nerd and a wimp, and he can't keep up with all the manly men around Possum Lodge. But when Red starts laying into him about it, Harold fires one back. Harold points out something Red sucks at. He points out some foible of him. He points out some error. It's nice. It's a lot more kind of like bonding and bantery than I think some of the similar-ish cruel comedy that you get in American sitcoms. I gotta say, a lot of this humor is very aged. It does definitely feel like a foreign country, and a lot of it isn't like hilarious or anything. It's kind of corny, but it hasn't aged poorly. You know, it hasn't become problematic or anything like that. The good naturedness of it, I think, really still shines through. What I really want to praise about this show, though, is that all of this comedy is presented in such an inventive, comfy, and just inherently unreal in a really interesting way variety show format. So if you haven't seen the show, it was filmed before a live audience where Harold, the nerdy nephew, and Red come out and talk about the latest plot line in Possum Lodge, whatever scheme they're undertaking. That kind of constitutes a skit. And then this is interjected between stuff shot on location where Red goes and visits one of these wacky characters and they have a whole shtick. And then skits where Red is just talking one on one with the audience. Um, Skits where Red is. Actually, I think I break it down in the slides. I don't know why I'm trying to remember. But yeah, I think what's very genius about this is that they have like the big overarching big event plot line, which is usually very elaborate and would have been impossible to actually film, you know, actually implement their own hydroelectric jam or whatever it is. So instead, you just hear the plot line by Red coming in and reporting and him and Harold kind of riffing on it. I think that's very, very smart because it really feels like it's happening. You're still kind of caught up in it. But it's just through storytelling. It's just through their own reports and banter. They don't actually have to film it. But then the way that it weaves in motivates a lot of other segments too. It really does feel like Possum Lake is this real place and everyone is actually reacting to this news that, you know, Red goes out and visits the forest ranger and talks to him about this plan and he offers his own wacky takes on it. Such a wide range of fun, man. The famous DIY tomfoolery, you know, that was a real hallmark of the show. Red trying to make actual crazy contraptions that they kind of like semi-built in real life, really. To wordplay, you know, the fun kind of taboo type guessing games that they feature quite often. Physical comedy excellence. The silent shorts of Red and Bill having crazy slapstick comedy that feels like it's right out of the 20s. Really great stuff, man. And then moments of like genuine compassion and sincerity. The moments where Red gives genuine advice to the people watching the show about getting along with your wife and living a rich and fulfilling life and, you know, handling the responsibilities thrust upon you in all directions. It's really quite sincere. When he says, you know, I'm pulling for you, we're all in this together. You believe it. It gets you right there. It's really nice. So I'll give this a 9 out of 10. You know, it was never my favorite show. I watched it all the time as a kid, but simply because it was on. And I really liked having it on again, too. It didn't need to be fully engrossing. It didn't need for my sides to split in laughter. I was just happy to have it as a presence. I think it's just so lovely. All right, let's talk about the 2024 Summer Olympics. Actually, first let's check my Slack messages. Make sure that's not urgent. That looks great. My boyfriend just telling me about a movie coming up. So, I got into the Olympics way more this year than I ever have before. It was a combo of my boyfriend just generally watching a lot of sports and being interested. And then that led to a lot of conversation with other friends, sometimes in group chats involving all of us, about just sort of the ongoing Olympics and stuff to watch. And most importantly, working from home and really enjoying just putting it on in the background as I worked. It really is like 10 out of 10 background content because there's so much downtime and so much like just kind of waiting for stuff to get set up, and you can work and go, ooh, they're doing one. Go back to work. Every day, it was so lovely. We'd chat about, hey, what did you want to watch today? What's coming up? What's going to be hype? And then I'd have it queued up, and around 2 p.m. it's, ooh, the skateboarding finals are on. We got to watch that. Tried to get a good cross-section of stuff, really try to take in the whole event. Skateboarding was a really high priority. Just really impressive, crazy stuff to watch. Everybody looks so cool, dude. Just like the fashion and everything. Like, it's kind of all across the board. I feel like there's such a cool fusion at the Olympics between like what's regulated by the committee, what is optimal for athletic performance, and then once you have checked those boxes, there's such a freedom of styles and such a diversity from all these different athletes from all over the world, expressed in their sport, expressed in their nationality, expressed in their own unique personality. Watched some 3-on-3 basketball. That was pretty sweet too. Found it a lot more watchable than normal basketball. I have a hard time watching the NBA, man. I get so frustrated, dude. Just the fouls. So many fucking fouls. Oh my god. But 3-on-3 was really cool. I liked how focused it felt. The range of things that could happen at any given time was like so precise and specific. Felt a little more like tactical in my mind, or at least it was more easy for me to discern the tactics compared to 5-on-5. Track and field always very consistently entertaining. I really love that they just do a whole bunch of stuff on the field simultaneously. And the way that the broadcast would cut in between different events, you could see stuff happening in the background. It really felt lovely. It was just like really exciting, It made me wish that I could appreciate the sports days in public school when I was growing up. I was like a very sickly and ungainly child that was not really equipped or interested in really any athletic stuff. So I spent most of those sports fests trying to get out of things and hide. But via anime and via the Olympics, I've really come to appreciate what cool events they are. And man, all the individual feats, just things people were doing, just mind-blowing. The extremes of the most basic human capabilities of like run, throw, jump. I had the opportunity to watch some stuff alongside my friends who are more expert. I have some friends that are pretty competitive and into stuff like weightlifting. One friend does like the Olympic lifting, other friends that were really into rock climbing. So that was really enlightening too. There's a lot of hidden depth in those sports that isn't so visible on the surface, but really gave me a lot more appreciation. And I watched breakdancing. Did you watch breakdancing? Huh? Or did you just see the memes? And you went, oh, Ray Gun, so goofy. How did she get in? Who put this in the Olympics in the first place? This isn't a sport. This is lame. No. If you actually watch it, if you watch the competitions, breakdancing was so cool, dude. It got so intense. It was like the best juxtaposition too between like the formality of the Olympics and just like the street culture of breakdancing. It was amazing. It was so good, dude. It was so awesome. Yeah, just the juxtaposition between breakdancing culture and the Olympic formality was already so novel that I was engrossed from the first seconds. But then the performances were just so good, dude. We live in a world that is plagued by war, persecution, total ecological collapse, and ongoing genocide. Ceasefire, sure, but the genocide won't end until the occupation is over. I'm not going to say something so stupid as, oh, well, the Olympics reminds us that we are all just human. No, 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 no. If anything, the Olympics reminds us of how fucked up the world is and how bizarre it is that all of these atrocities are happening between all of these nations comprised of real people. Real human beings are doing this shit to each other. It really feels almost like horrific in its revealing of the human condition. But moreover, it is fascinating. It is such a unique and fascinating avenue of geopolitical relations that, like all other avenues, reveals ugliness and depravity and dehumanizations at its core, and can be frustrating and depressing. But goddamn, is it interesting. All right, there's Phil Wizard, Canadian hero who took home the gold. My goat. Gotta watch his performances, man. Don't fucking talk to me about Ray Gun. I don't care about Ray Gun. Whatever. Okay, she did something silly on TV. Okay. Have you never seen something silly on TV before? Does that mean you are going to overlook the mastery of Phil Wizard? I'll give this a 9. This is a good time. Looking forward to the Winter Olympics. All right, I watched the first 4 episodes of the show Midnight Mass. This might be like the most critically acclaimed horror TV series ever. I don't really know what the competition is. I'm not super well versed on this genre, especially for TV shows versus movies. But this series had like a lot of superlative plays going into it. I had heard such amazing things from so many people. It like sweeps all sorts of critical stats and stuff. So I went in with high hopes, and so far I have actually been very, very impressed. It's interesting too because a lot of the stuff, like had I read a synopsis of it or had someone just sort of described in broad strokes what it was like, I probably wouldn't want to watch it. I probably would have been very hesitant and been like, oh, that doesn't really sound like it's for me. This idea of tough times, small town Americana, a depressed economy where all of these people are just sort of doing their best. Generally speaking, no matter how well done this setting is, with definitely some other exceptions, this isn't like it's the only exception, but like most of the time, I'm just like not that interested in this setting. I'm kind of just like, how do I put this? I'm like, oh, you guys want to return to your old life of like working in a prosperous factory or being financially stable fishermen? That also sounds like it sucks. It's kind of like, yeah, it's these settings that are like pining for a return to a more prosperous era, but the more prosperous era sounds equally hellish to me, like personally, and so I just really can't get invested in it when they're like, I miss when we were really a small town. Ugh. So, all right, yeah, that would have been one turn off. And most of the main plot lines of characters are kind of around like seeking redemption. Our main dude Riley for sure, but to greater or lesser extents with a lot of different characters' plot lines, it's all kind of about, oh, they've been traumatized, they've been through so much, they feel guilt or shame or they struggle or whatever, and now they're trying to find some way to redeem themselves. Again, it's like for some reason this just doesn't hit with me all so often. I think because often I just kind of dislike these sorts of characters, and I just find the whole thing sort of eye-rolly, And the way that this is conveyed throughout the show, long, extremely sincere conversations and a sentimentality again towards a past that I find off-putting. And this reminds me, the only other thing I've seen by Mike Flanagan, to my knowledge, maybe I've seen other things and I didn't know it was him, was this movie Life of Chuck that I saw at TIFF, and that could also be described in many ways very similarly to all of this, and I did not like that movie. I found it excruciating. And on paper, this does seem quite similar. And then the horrific elements, so far at least, okay. I like horror that feels inexplicable, baffling, something that constantly eludes you, something that feels like kind of a primordial psychological exploit almost. Things that feel like they're conjured up from true nightmares beyond the limitations of reality. These are all, generally speaking, what stands out to me in the stuff that I find most scary and most engrossing in the whole horror genre. And I don't want to say for sure because I've only watched about half of it. But so far, the horrific elements, like the supernatural elements and kind of the causality of everything, seems kind of pedestrian. And again, it's not like there aren't exceptions. There's lots of other of this sort of more pedestrian, straightforward horror that I really like. But it would have been another turnoff. Had I known, I would have been like, oh, it's just that? Okay. If you say so. But despite all this, everything in this show just really, really works for me. All of these things that their intents usually miss the mark for me, that I don't feel the way they want me to feel, I'm feeling it. I don't know how exactly. I think if I analyzed it and I really broke it down, I could come to some conclusions. But I think in doing so, I might actually lose a bit of the magic that this show has on me. So I'm just going to say that, like, mysteriously, through some mysterious force of performance and characterization and just the way the emotional tenor of the show depicts them, I started to really care about these characters, like, a lot. Way, way quicker than I would have been able to anticipate. And it's like, they remind me of the characters in Avatar 2, a movie that I absolutely adored, where their characterizations are like really right down the middle, true Americana, but they really became close to my heart. Very, very lovable. And the long conversations, which again on paper I would have thought to roll my eyes at, they're just like interesting. Like actually very interesting. The perspectives of the characters and the sort of theological issues that are bound up in this when they talk about Christianity and they talk about how would a loving God do this, and so many things that get brought up and discussed that again, maybe if I had been told, oh yeah, these are the themes of the show, I would have rolled my eyes. But they're just like actually really thorough, interesting theological statements being debated. That's just neat, dude. It's like actually stuff that I care about. And it's nothing mind-blowing. It's nothing that I'm just like, wow, this totally transcends what I thought was possible. But all of these subjects are just so impassioned with great performances, delivered by, as I said, characters that I really, really cared about, such that debates that I've seen before, stuff that I read about in like Dostoevsky, and the stuff that's been been the motivation for theological debate for centuries, really does feel interesting again. It really does engross me. And the whole atmosphere and mood of it, oh man. Just like the fusion of this like town full of regrets, this town full of loss and disappointment, having these horrific elements slowly creep up around them. It's so good, man. I don't know. And again, it's like I can't dissect it down to any specific choices necessarily. But, and I can't wait to watch more. But I must, because I really want to continue watching this with my boyfriend. He's a big fan. He's the one that said we should watch it. And yet, this sleepy motherfucker, I don't know if I'll be able to stay awake if we watch a hour-long episode. Excuses. I want to see what happens, man. You already know what happens. I don't know if he's watching this. I'm going to address him like he's watching this. You already know what happens. You can't empathize. For me, it's still a mystery. I want to know the answers. You've seen this before. You can't be the one going, I don't feel like it. I do feel like it. But yeah, great stuff. Great stuff. Give us a 9. Really, really enjoying it. Very excited to see how it closes out. If you know what scene this was from. Definitely my favorite scene of the whole thing. That was the scene that like really got me, and I was like, aha. Just everything about this scene I thought was perfect. Okay. All right, let's close this out by talking about Beast games. I think we're up to episode 5. I've still only seen the first 3 episodes. I've been watching it with some friends, and we haven't had a time to watch the latest 2. But we'll talk about the first 3. So I've been watching Mr. Beast videos for like 7 years now. Okay, I'm an OG Beastoid, so of course I had to see this. And I wouldn't really say that I am a fan of Mr. Beast per se. It's kind of complicated to describe my relationship with these videos and why I keep watching them. I think that in itself could be quite a long, maybe interesting video, just my take on Mr. Beast as a whole. It is overwhelmingly negative. I do not think he is a good person, and I do not think he wields a good influence in the world. Charitable work aside. But I am very, very, very fascinated by Mr. Beast, and very, very fascinated by his history and his rise to fame and success, and the fact that he is essentially an endurance artist, and just the way that I perceive his worldview is like really fascinating to me. So I think about Mr. Beast a lot. He's kind of always on my mind. Basically, to summarize what might be like an hour-long YouTube video, my thesis is that he is a total moral blank, where his only care, his only care in this world is about succeeding on YouTube. And I think he has been this way since he was around 10 years old, and that it is like the only way his brain can operate. That he's obviously a human being. He's getting married, he has Crohn's disease, he has all these friendships, he has hobbies, he has fascinations. All of that aside, it's like he has another need that is on the same level as oxygen and food to us non-beasts. And for him, there is an insatiable need on that level to succeed on YouTube and to make videos that a lot of people watch. So as a consequence, he does some charitable things, and he also does a lot of really, really awful things. You hear these stories that behind the scenes, he's very tyrannical and slave driving to get these videos out, to get editors to do what he wants and all of this other stuff. And he associates with a lot of sketchy people. I don't want to get into that. That's like years and years and years of mostly kind of irreverent drama that occasionally has something truly horrifying in it. All of that feels like very natural, because all of that is the sort of thing that happens just sort of as a consequence if you only care about succeeding on YouTube and do not care about what steps you take to get there, or who you associate with, or what you make people do. I think he has become the preeminent endurance artist of our lifetime. That's just true. Sorry, Maria Abramovich. It's the Beast era of endurance art. And he has produced a ton of very entertaining videos. He's really about it. He goes all out because that is all he cares about. So, most importantly to Beast games. And again, it's like, I don't think it's because he is a sociopath. I don't think it is because he is naturally a cruel person. I think totally as a consequence of trying to come up with stuff that would be entertaining and get a lot of people to watch, he has come up with games and contests and stuff like that, which is the core of Beast games, These are so insane, so depraved, so oriented around bringing out the misery of the human condition, so focused around people just being total psychological abusers of one another. It would make Fukumoto blush. Fukumoto watching Beast Games goes, oh my god, what's wrong with this guy? Beast Games, to some extent, is just more of the same. It is just a very natural evolution of everything that was happening on the YouTube channel. But at the same time, it is like absolutely nothing else I have ever seen. The sheer number of people, at least in the early episodes, they've been dwindling pretty quickly. But seeing 1,000 people engaging in these sadistic competitions creates like this animalizing factor where everything just becomes this horde of emotion. And it really feels like you are witnessing human as ape, human stripped bare of all civilization, and just at the mercy of this collective hysteria. At the same time, rapidly it just zooms in to particular individuals, narrativizes them, attempts to humanize them. You hear why they want to win the $5 million. You hear about all the trauma and suffering of their lives. It's the most American thing ever. It's the most capitalist thing ever. It is so rapid, so jarring. It's genuinely crazy making. Just the tenor of the show is stretched till snapping in so many different directions simultaneously. With this strange, like, bizarre algorithmic misfire, where at some point he recognized that showing people crying was a winner, that was an algorithmic winner, that made people tune in. And so a major part of a lot of Mr. Beast videos was showing people so grateful that they start crying. And then Mr. Beast goes, hey, you're gonna make me tear up. He says that like every time because he is an automaton. And it's like they seem to have carried over that energy and that lesson, but now they really relish in showing people who have just lost crying or people that are so stressed by these competitions that they're having like a breakdown. They still show them crying with like the same tenor. And it's like, I think this was like legit like a misfire where they were like, oh, we need to have like 5% crying scenes. Okay, well, there's somebody crying. Let's use that footage. It's like, bro, those aren't the same tears. Somebody crying because you gave them a free car and somebody crying because you just told them that they were eliminated from competition. That's very, very different. And then, you know, this is just the most insane cavalcade of human misery and suffering and screaming and crying and desperation and scheming and psychological abuse and endurance. I described it before as if it was Sallow edited for TikToks. You have all that, and then again in some weird algorithmic misfire, Jimmy and company come up and go, hey, throwing the ball there, huh? You know, if you get it in, it's worth $1 million or whatever the hell's going on. And it's just like, bruh, it makes no sense. I just really cannot overstate how psychotic these games are, dude. In episode 3 especially. Wait, did I watch episode 4? No, I think we did watch episode 4. Shoot, yeah. We watched an episode after episode 3. Well, whatever. Episode 3 was really, truly very psychotic. They're all psychotic. And we're just getting started. It's gonna get worse. I like, eventually there's gonna be like 2 people fighting over $5 million. And it is gonna be the most insane fucking thing I've ever seen. I'm gonna give this, this person is like one of the most evil human beings I have ever seen on a camera, by the way. I'm including like the news. This is like a true demon that slithered out from hell to participate on this show. We're gonna give this a question mark. On the one hand, It is some of the most visceral, intense entertainment I have seen on television this year or any year. On the other hand, it is such an evil spectacle that is like kicking over the rocks, the facade of humanity, and seeing just disgusting insect warfare engaged perpetually underneath. Where do I actually feel about it? I have no clue, dude. I am locked in, like I'm strapped to a train that's going off a cliff in one of his amazing train versus giant pit videos. I've been strapped in ever since I found out about Mr. Beast. Ever since I watched, I put a million Orbeez in my friend's backyard. I think is the first one I remember. And I'll see you at the bottom of the pit, man. We'll talk about it. I would like to do like a full video on Mr. Beast after Beast Games ends, maybe. And we'll talk about Beast Games. We'll talk about Mr. Beast's full career, how I feel about it. I have like some weird connections to him in some ways. We both have. I don't have Crohn's disease, but I had very severe IBS growing up. And we both played competitive Gen 4 Pokemon. So I feel a little connection with Jimmy over there. It's wild stuff. Yeah, it gets a question mark. That's it. That's the climax of this video. An unscorable, truly unscorable. I hope you enjoyed. We talked about some good shows. Overall, I feel like my cultivation of TV is in a really great spot. I don't watch a ton of it, but I know to watch things I'll enjoy. And I'm looking forward to 2025, watching some more bangers and reporting back in 2026. See you then.